Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, and thank you for joining today's webinar, the latest updates in the 2017 Intacct Release 2. I'm Megan Turco, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we jump in, I'm going to briefly go over how to use your webinar console. The orange arrow on the right side of your screen will let you toggle the control tray open or closed, and at the bottom of that control tray, you'll see a chat window. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar via the chat function, and we'll get to those towards the end of the webinar. Additionally, on your GoToWebinar console, you should see an area for audio settings. If you're calling in through your telephone, please choose the Use Telephone option. Alternatively, if you're using your computer speakers, please select the Use Mic and Speakers option. Additionally, I do want to note that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send out the slides as well as a link to the on-demand recording to the webinar within about 48 hours. So definitely keep an eye out for that message if you're interested in accessing the webinar after today or sharing it with any of your colleagues who couldn't make it to the webinar live this morning. With that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. First up, we have Manesh Patel, who is a manager on Armanino's Intacct team. Manesh is a certified Intacct implementation consultant and has worked on over 100 Intacct implementations. He's led systems implementations to automate business processes around accounting, budgeting, forecasting, and fixed assets, and has extensive experience working in various ERP and other technology solutions as well. We also have Brenda Kaler with us today. Brenda is also a manager on the Intacct team here at Armanino. She has over 15 years of accounting experience in Big Four public accounting and in-house as a controller, primarily at nonprofits. Prior to joining Armanino, she led an Intacct implementation for a $50 million nonprofit operating in over 20 countries. It's great to have you both here today, and with that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to you, Brenda, to get us started.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So for today's agenda, first I want to say, before we get into the actual agenda, this is one of the biggest releases I've seen from Intacct. There was over 211,000 lines of code added or changed in this release, over 20,000 files added or changed, and over 352,000 unique automation tests that they did in their beta testing to make sure that this release was ready to go. It's also the first time in 9 years that Intacct hasn't released a patch on Monday following the release. So all of that testing really resulted, this is a big update, so they did some extra testing, and it really resulted in a really high quality update. So we're really excited to share with you the updates we have today in purchasing, contracts, administration of the system, the new Salesforce integration, projects, inventory, reporting, and then there is a whole laundry list of other enhancements that were either really small things or one-offs that didn't really fit into one of these categories above here. So diving right in to purchasing. Purchasing approval enhancements. So this has been a long time in coming, I think. So now you also have the option to do department level transaction approvals. So previously you could do it by location, and now you can do it by department. So you can select the specific approvers and their approval limits for each department, and approvals will go to those approvals who need to see them. The approval routing starts with the first approver, progresses, the same as it would in sequence until the amount being approved falls below the threshold of the next approver. So you can do it same as with location. You can either do it by the department of the submitter, so that of the employee or employee user that's submitting the purchasing transaction. Or you can also do it by the department of the transaction that's being submitted. So similar, but now instead of being on location, it's also on department. So that's an exciting improvement here in purchasing approvals. The other other thing I'm really excited about here is about rule sets. So oftentimes you've got several different purchasing approval workflows. You maybe have dozens of transaction definitions, and instead of having to copy all of that, anybody who's ever set up transaction definitions themselves know it is a pretty tedious process, and it's relatively manual as well, setting up all of those items and GL groups. So the nice thing now is you can set a rule set. And the nice thing about this is you define the rules once and then apply them wherever they're needed. So you can tailor different approval rule sets for purchase requisitions versus purchase orders. And by using different rule sets for different transaction definitions, you can set the different value approvals as well. And you can apply them by department. So in the example I have up here on the screen, purchase requisition set is done with 2 sets of rules. So you've got your default set of rules on the left-hand side here, where you're showing your department manager and then some specifically named people doing approvals. And that's kind of the overall, the default rule. But you can see on the right-hand side, we've also got a little bit of a carve-out for the marketing department. So this, maybe the marketing department has a much higher threshold here, as they do in this instance. So with these rules, a purchase transaction for $10,000 would be routed, for the marketing department, it would only be routed to the first approver because $10,000 falls below the second approver's minimum approval amount. However, if it's for any other department, it'll go to the first approver and then to the second approver. So this allows you to do basically exception routing. So instead of having now a different transaction definition for the marketing department and for everybody else, you can now have the same transaction definition and just have these approval rule sets doing the carve out. So that's definitely going to cut down on the number of works and gives you a lot more flexibility in approvals. So really excited about that. The second thing that everybody has been asking for, I think, since anybody started using purchasing Intacct is being able to delegate approvals. Super excited that this is finally a feature. So in order to enable the delegation of approvals, all you administrators out there, you need to go into your purchasing configuration and you'll now see a checkbox to select to enable delegation of approvals. Once you check that box, you'll get a little grid. It'll have everybody who is able to purchase, to do purchase approvals on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you're going to have all the people you can delegate it to. So every purchasing approver is going to have one delegate. You can change that delegate, and as needed from time to time. But when they go into, once you have enabled it and set up the default delegate, then those people will be able to go in under My Preferences, select the box for out of office, send approvals to the delegate, and who that goes to is going to be based on what you as the admin have set on the configuration tab. The reason it's being done this way instead of allowing the people to be able to choose their own delegate is really for internal controls purposes, to make sure that there is administrator oversight over who's allowed to be a delegate approver, because you want to make sure that that person has the requisite position and knowledge to be able to do those approvals on behalf of somebody. So that person will receive all of the notifications, and they'll be able to approve purchasing transactions and view everything in their own queue as if they were the original approver. So when they get back, the person who is out of office will go back into My Preferences, uncheck the box for the out of office, and then they'll be able to get their purchasing transactions back into their queue. And don't worry if you forget. I'm sure that person that you delegated to is going to be quick to tell you that you need to take back your delegation, especially if you have high volume purchasing transactions. So they will receive all of the emails, making sure under My Preferences that they have it checked, because it's not checked by default. Only journal entry approvals is checked by default. So when you're going to set your out of office, if you are going to be a delegate, I do recommend that before you do that, you make sure under My Preferences that you have checked that you want to be able to receive those purchasing requests in your email, especially if you're not a day-to-day user of Intacct. Having that email push can be really helpful. All right, Manesh, over to you for contracts.
Awesome. Contracts is up next. I did have one quick call out for everyone. As Brenda mentioned, there are huge updates to the approval policies in purchasing, so it may be a great time to kind of review how your current processes are for approvals and determine whether you would like to make any kind of changes to those processes. So we're always available to help. Feel free to reach out to us, because some of these small configuration changes could mean efficiencies on your end. So that was great. Thanks, Brenda. So next up is contracts. We talked through contracts actually quite a bit in terms of updates in the last release. So there is some additional flavor, not as high in volume as the prior release, but there's some additional flavor added that I'm just going to kind of walk you through. Intacct has added a multiplier field in a few areas. The first area is actually within the contracts record. You can actually have fixed fee contracts. Prior to this, you would put in a certain value for like a fixed fee contract. However, the multiplier field will now allow you to have a quantity, a rate, so quantity times rate times a certain multiplier minus a certain discount to perform that calculation. So it just gives you a little bit more flavor. That flavor extends itself into order entry. So the UI for order entry actually has this new multiplier field included. So you can actually see a one-to-one mapping relationship in the way that the calculations are done. And that leads me to the next slide, Brenda, which takes us through to the way that the invoice is actually presented to the customer. So as we all know, you can create your own custom documents in terms of order entry sales invoices in this example, or different types of documents actually be customer facing. And those documents that you can customize are typically done through Microsoft Word, and though it may seem a little outdated, you're still downloading that add-in tool and then choosing from a bunch of merge fields to actually grab that into the invoice to actually show to your customers. So that field is now exposed in the custom document, so you'll be able to see that in the case that you want to give more detailed pricing information to your customers. So next up is, how do we set this up? So it's just a few steps to go in and create like a multiplier field, or actually track it. In the actual transaction definitions that you use with your contracts, you would actually select the track line item discount / surcharge and enable for contracts. So it's a button that you would select. And then as well, in the configuration for order entry, there is a default area for decimal places. You would be able to configure that and set that default to 10. And then this section down below, it seems a bit wordy, but all this is demonstrating is you have to have the proper permissions to have access to this. In this case, subscriptions to contracts and order entry. What types of permissions within those two modules, the list view, add, edit, delete feature, for example, and then the configuration, those two steps that I just mentioned. So in a nutshell, just a few additional flavors on contracts itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Vinesh. Couple updates in administration, and this is one that clients I heard complain about often, is especially if you're using order entry or accounts receivable to send your customers invoices from your system. Previously, when you emailed the invoices or statements to the customers, those emails were sent from an email address at intacct.com. Though useful, the emails often ended up in junk or spam because they didn't know Intacct should have been whitelisted and it wasn't from you, so they weren't sure what it was. Plus, it has an attachment from an unknown email address that usually got caught up in people's spam filters there. Pardon me. So since emails now come from your email domain instead of from Intacct, you can benefit, one, from them not going into junk and spam, and two, increase branding and peace of mind that the emails are being received by your customers. So to be able to enable this, you have to go to your company information configuration. You do have to be an admin to update that. And on the security tab, you now have an additional section, and that's for the email sender domain settings. So you'll enter in your domain in the top box. For example, armaninollp.com is what we use here at Armanino. You'll have to work with whoever administrates your email at your company to make sure that they can add the key that's listed, and that's going to be unique for each company, to the domain's text records to verify that Intacct is allowed to use the domain. So you're definitely going to have to coordinate with your IT, especially if you have firewalls, just making sure that this gets updated and you're allowed to use the domain. And we do recommend that you check the Enforce DNS validation box. And what that does is when you're sending items out from the system, it immediately checks your domain records for the sender email key, so that helps prevent email spoofing. So that's a pretty exciting update. It does take a couple steps in coordination with your IT department, but especially if you're sending invoices to customers or even sending those alerts to your AP vendors that you've got to check for them, it can be really nice to have those emails come from you instead of from Intacct. Okay, in the last release, we unveiled the new audit trail, and they have been making some enhancements to the audit trail as a result of that. So the audit trail, in case you guys have not noticed it or been able to make use of it, it is available under More Actions on the top right-hand corner on most transaction and dimension records. It allows the admin to know who made changes to a particular record by capturing the date and time of the change, what action was taken on the record, whether it was created, modified, or deleted, as well as who made the change and from where. And the update in this release is that you can now see the source of the transaction. So when they first rolled this out, you could only see if it was done as a system-generated transaction or if it was done through the user interface. In this release, they've now added through the API as well as CSV. So you can tell if something was done in an upload template in the API as a system-generated transaction or through the user interface kind of live in the system. So that's helpful, especially for troubleshooting, trying to figure out how some transactions got created or modified in that case. They've also enhanced and increased the scope of what transactions are now covered under the audit trail. When they first rolled it out, it wasn't quite on every object, and now most objects within the system do have the audit trail. So you can see what was changed or modified, and it's now added a couple of different events. So the print, approve, and reverse events previously were not audit trailable, let's call it, and now they are going to be captured on that screen as well. So this is really great. I know a lot of people are done with their audits if you are calendar year end, but for those who are on fiscal year ends and quickly approaching your audits, this is going to be a pretty valuable tool as you start going through that, and the auditors are asking you questions about journals, approvals, and modification history. The second big update here is for the API. So now through the API, they have added a couple different API calls that you can see. So if you are using the API, you can now use the get audit trail query function out of the API to pull the audit trail, basically a history tab from each one of the transactions. And you can also see it in the read by query. So you'll be able to see audit trail events in two different ways through the API now. So that's pretty exciting.
Awesome.
That's
so next up is the, yeah, thank you. So the next up is the Salesforce integration. So if we just step back a bit, Salesforce as a system and Intacct as a system have the ability to connect together, and that's one of the huge benefits of that we see with a lot of our clients to kind of communicate between the two systems, so you have one complete sales to billing lifecycle. And so for many of our clients that use Salesforce, the Intacct connector, Salesforce has actually come up with a new user interface called the Lightning user interface, and as a result of that, Intacct has released a new version of this connector. And so sometimes if you're currently in an implementation with us, we might refer to it as like V2 or version 2 connector. Intacct's calling it the advanced CRM integration. Either way, this kind of gives us the ability to connect to the latest and greatest Salesforce environment. So if we move to the next slide, I think this does a really good job of just kind of explaining that both systems are completely in sync. There are several updates, but the big area of focus is that part of this Salesforce Lightning user interface was done to present a new updated look, as well as take additional kind of security reviews. Usually when systems like this are going through like a new UI change, it means that there's just a new form of security, a more updated look, kind of a fresher perspective. So so this just kind of demonstrates that the two systems will continue to talk to each other. One of the big changes as a part of this advanced CRM integration compared to the current connector or the older connector is that the Intacct is actually synchronizing all records back from both sets of systems. So using kind of Salesforce APIs, it means several records can be synchronized at the same time. So as you can see kind of from the two-way integration. Also, in addition to that, we kind of talked through contracts, and in a few slides before this, that has a connection to this new user interface. If we actually move to the next slide, it actually shows us all the areas that are kind of new. So you'll see account and contact synchronization, that auto sync-in that I mentioned, reseller tracking. We talked a little bit about contract billing. Of course, what you're all used to seeing if you're using the current connector, the connection to order entry. So if you have close won opportunities going in as sales orders or sales quotes in Intacct, to push it all the way through the cycle, even across the payments as well on sales invoices. And then in addition to that, of course, continued support on projects and tasks. If you're bringing in projects, if the starting point of projects is in Salesforce, and wanting to bring in both projects and tasks into Intacct, then of course that support already exists. So really the big reasons for this change is Salesforce kind of stemming that. Any of our current implementations that we're doing right now, we are recommending the advanced CRM integration, this new V2 connector. One of the common questions that we're getting from our clients is, well, I'm using the old connector, am I going to be able to continue to use that old connector? And yes, the answer is there is not a timetable between when Salesforce will eventually move to this Lightning user interface. Right now they're between Classic and Lightning, so as long as you're sticking in Classic, then that connector will do its job. But eventually when Salesforce does migrate fully to the Salesforce Lightning interface, user interface, then it will require you or us to re-implement the new connector. So that's a big call out. Unfortunately, there is no timetable that has been determined, but just kind of important to know for future. And that's the kind of the big update here on this V2 connector. So definitely reach out to us if you have any questions or comments or concerns, and we can always kind of help you answer further. And if we can't answer it, we'll reach out to Intacct and help kind of provide some support inquiries.
Awesome. Great call out, Manesh. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions that come up as we're going through the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll try and get to them as we're going through these sections. We'll also hopefully have some time at the end where we can cover any additional questions that may come up. All right, moving into projects. So the change here, there's a couple changes that were made to the projects for this release, mostly related to resource scheduling and transaction rules. So the first update here is being able to do recurring schedules on scheduling resources. So now you can set up tasks, and when you set up the tasks, you have the option now, after you select a resource, you can see here we have a little calendar icon. That's a new icon that's going to appear next on the left-hand side of all of your task resources. So you click on that, and then you can add the recurring schedule with the pop-up here. So this allows you to schedule the total number of hours, the total per occurrence. So if you have something, maybe somebody's going to be working 5 hours for the next 10 weeks, so your total hours would be 50, your hours per occurrence would be 5. You would set your schedule to repeat weekly, set your start date, and then your number of occurrences for the repeat. So the nice thing about this is anybody that is using, timesheets and project resource scheduling with the projects module, previously you would have to do 10 entries for that employee with a separate date ranges to make sure that it wasn't spreading hours to the weekends, and that everything was lined up where they were actually going to expend the level of effort. So this makes scheduling your projects and your resources much quicker. So the nice thing about that is it actually feeds into this next update, which actually allows you to change the dates. So previously, if you had a task or a project date that changed, you had to go in and manually adjust each task. And when you manually adjusted each task, then you had to go in and adjust each resource individually. And that can be very time consuming if you have a lot of resources scheduled on the project. So the nice thing here is that now you can automatically shift the resource assignments when the associated tasks start and end date change. For example, if you need to delay your task 2 weeks, you can automatically move your resource assignments back to start 2 weeks later than their originally scheduled date. And this would be for all tasks subsequent to the original task. Additionally, you can choose to push back the task end date 2 weeks as well, which retains the original task duration time. Those are independent options because, as you guys probably know, if you're using this, sometimes your start date changes, but your end date stays the same. So you do have the option to push out the end date or to keep that as the same end date, probably with the same number of hours, just increasing the number of hours per week. So a similar capability is available at the project level, except you can shift both the task dates and the resource assignment dates at the same time. So if your project, for example, is being delayed by 20 days, you can shift all the associated tasks out 20 days and also the related resource assignments. So that is an exciting change with resource scheduling for those of you that are using it there. There's also another small update related to tasks. So now when you're setting up tasks for your project, the task dates will automatically default to the beginning and ending dates of your project. You do still have the ability to override them, but if all of your tasks are going to fall in line with your project, this will make it a lot quicker to be able to set up those tasks as well as the associated resources. Okay, and this is the big one. So for anybody that is using a lot of the different transaction rules, and that would primarily be those folks that are using timesheets within the system, and where you're rebilling some of that time to a project, to a customer. So especially when you're using the order entry base price, if you've got different bill rates for different people, before you had to make sure that that bill rate was assigned to the project. And then if it wasn't assigned on the resource level, the resource would default to the project. But if you had different billing rates for different resources, or if you had different billing rates for the same person but on a different task, you would still need to set that on the various people and task levels. But if you're using a standard pricing, maybe everybody gets billed out at $2.50 an hour, like we have in this example here, then you no longer have to set it up on the resource, on the task, or on the project. If there is nothing noted in any of those for a bill rate, it will default to the order entry base price list. And if you have ever set up an item in order entry, about the middle of the screen, left-hand side, about halfway down, there's the base price list there, and it's set by item. And that actually creates your base price list in Intacct by populating that field on your item. So if you don't have any billing rates on your project project tasks or resources, it will automatically default to that. So for those of you that are not doing variable pricing based on things, now you no longer have to complete any of those fields when you're setting up your projects. So that can save you a lot of time as well, and it makes it much easier to do centralized billing. So definitely helpful for those using the revenue WIPs or the unbilled revenue, unbilled WIPs related to those timesheet costs. All
Awesome.
right, back to you.
Yeah. So next area is inventory. There's been 3 key updates regarding inventory, so we'll start with the first one. Effective dates are essentially being introduced for if you're following any kind of standard costing for your inventory items. So prior to this, you can have one standard cost per warehouse per item, and when you needed to update it, you would have to go in and update that field. So Intacct has released this idea of having a date or an effective date, so you can actually put ranges for when certain costs should transpire. So almost like those rule sets where Brenda was talking about during the purchasing, it kind of gives a little bit more clarity and actually more accuracy on the standard costing. So in this example, you can see that in this warehouse, there's a table that's introduced that shows the standard cost entries with the various effective dates. So it's all based upon the base currency of the entity at that warehouse. So as you can see, it's in USD, but I have now effective start dates from 1/1/2017 for $100, 4/1/2017, on and on. So you can actually have different date ranges that are associated. And so the important call out here is when you do set all of these effective start dates, then any of your inventory postings before this first effective date will have a cost of 0. And then that standard cost for the last effective date is used in any other postings after that date. So it follows kind of that range that we were just referring to. So just good to be able to manage that. I didn't include a screenshot of this, but once, let's just say that you have, I actually have a client that has thousands of items. So if you wanted to go in and update and add these various dates, it's, you don't want to do that manually. So in the company setup checklist, there is a CSV file where you can actually import all of those costs with the effective start dates. So don't worry that you have to do things manually if you do have kind of a high volume of items. The next key update here, Brenda, is kind of along the CSV updates example that I just gave, but this is introducing serial numbers. So when we actually did an implementation with a client maybe about 3 or 6 months ago where we were asking about serial number tracking, and that was fairly a manual process, but Intacct has now introduced this in the form of being able to update this via the API, through like a CSV import, or of course through the user interface, through like a table style. So serial number tracking is now possible, and you can manage it in various ways as well. And the final update in inventory is related to warehouse transfers. So how do you handle the transfer of items from one warehouse to another warehouse? And it may be within the same entity, but how do you actually handle that? So Intacct has introduced a easy way of managing that. And part of this process involves going through like a warehouse transfer function. So let's move to the next slide, and I think this will demonstrate it pretty well. So this actually shows where the transfer is happening, both the transfer in and the transfer out. So what exactly are we transferring out, item-wise, location-wise, and maybe any other dimensions tagged to those items, transferring in to a warehouse with all the other dimensions as well.
Nash, I think we just lost you. Manesh?
Well, we'll see if we can get Manesh back, but Brenda, I'll let you kind of continue on with the next section there.
Okay. Manesh, let me know if you get your volume back. Otherwise, I'm gonna wing this. So with this new update here, we've got reports, and with this update, you now do not have to leave your dashboard to create new reports. So this is getting ready for the new report center that's going to come out. We'll be demoing the new user interface at the end of this update, and you'll be able to see a little bit how they're starting to get that in there. They've got kind of the reports control center where everything that you can build, everything you need to build a report is available in the system. So all of the dimensions, all of the account groups, everything that you need there. So whether you're creating a new dashboard or adding components and it hasn't been created yet, you can now hover over it and say add component and add it directly from there, which is pretty exciting. And also up until now, here's the other thing. System components and dashboards. So Intacct has changed the behavior from running a report in the system or a graph directly from the library. So to simplify the dashboard creation and take advantage of the filtering, now when you add a new component to a dashboard, the selection list doesn't contain any of the system-based reports or graphs. So it's really going to be focused on all of your items there. And Manesh, we can circle back to you if you do get your audio back to add any clarity.
Perfect. I'm actually back in the mix.
There you are. Yes.
Wow. First time this happened, and apologies for everyone, but right when I was getting into the examples. So once again, apologies. So if we just go back, I think we just went to the dashboard. So Brenda, let's hop back to that one-step warehouse transfer. Perfect.
Perfect.
So this is just kind of the UI. I was just trying to demonstrate that it shows the transfer in, the transfer out, and you can actually have the items linked to various costs and dimensions so that it makes it easier to perform the warehouse transfer. And so, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to demonstrate on that. And then Brenda, did we have a chance, did you talk through the next portion of this with dashboards? So I think Brenda may have touched on this, but
sorry, I was on
dashboards is no problem. So Brenda may have touched on this, but dashboards have been a big area of focus over the past year or so. Dashboard filtering, if you're currently utilizing that, just kind of gives you the ability to filter off of dimensions or time periods and kind of make it dynamic all the way across all the different components. One of the issues that, and I do a lot of dashboard creation for many of our clients, one of the issues, or almost the knick-knack, is when you're adding a new component, let's just say it's a new report, and you wanted to put it into the dashboard, you always have to go back into another tab and let's just say it's a vendor aging graph. You have to go to the vendor aging graph and then go in and add that, memorize that and add it to the dashboard. So now Intacct has the ability of actually adding the component on the go. So it saves you the time, and if you can see that little plus button in the screenshot, it will take you to an adding feature that you can kind of add a report into the mix. So just an easier way to get around. And then if we go back to the prior, or the next slide as well, I think Brenda, you may have already talked about this, but there's been some behavioral changes in the way that some of the out-of-the-box graphs are set up and different subsystem components within those. So that also includes both reports, graphs, and the performance cards. So they just changed the behavior around this. It doesn't mean that if you're already creating your own version of these reports, graphs, or performance cards, pulling in those current out-of-the-box account groups, that anything will change. It just means that there is some more filtering behind the scenes. So just a few minor changes on the dashboards and reporting. I think we're going to continue to see some of these little minor updates as we go through the next series of releases. And if you haven't worked with dashboards yet, or haven't created them or started to try to create them yourself, definitely reach out to us because we can kind of take you through the whole process.
Absolutely. Manesh is our dashboard guru, so he's really great at setting you up with exactly what you need to be able to manage and analyze your business. Okay, so now we're kind of into the general catch-all bucket of those little items that make your life so much easier. So diving right in, there's been an update to spend management in this release. So now you are able to validate transactions when there is no budget match. So in some cases, budgets may not have included a reporting period, or they have unmatched dimensions. Maybe you've got a budget loaded in for location, and the system is looking for a location and department combination. So purchase requisitions can pass through unvalidated, is what is happening, because if it doesn't find a match, it has nothing to validate against it. So if your organization is looking to enforce a more rigid budget policy, you can now treat no budget as nothing allowed. So if there is no budget for a reporting period or for certain dimensions, spend management will validate the transaction as if it has a budget value of 0. It then warns or stops the purchase depending on how you configured spend management, and you can configure it from there. So on this here, we've got some instructions on how to go and update your spend management configuration if you are using that in conjunction with your purchasing option. It looks like I no longer have control. There we go. Help Center enhancements. So this is a change. It's going to be, you may notice it if you go to use help instead of popping you up into the Help Center that you may be familiar with. I've got a screenshot on here of what the new Help Center looks like. So really, they've been embarking on a long project. They've done a lot of test cases, working with a lot of users and partners to re-envision and reorganize all of the data that's in their Help Center to make it much easier to browse. Obviously, when you're in a transaction or you're adding master data, you can use the help on this page. It'll bring you right to the help for that section. But if you're just getting used to Intacct and want to, quote unquote, poke around, it was a little bit more difficult to find what you might be looking for. So really, they reorganized it considering how people think about the wide array of features that are available in Intacct, what groupings naturally come to mind for common tasks and concepts, and which questions come up most often. And after doing this evaluation, what they really ended up with is that there were 5 main areas where things kept coming up. And that's how they have it organized here. So they have it organized into basics, which is going to be all those tips and tricks that apply across all of Intacct. This is where I would direct new users to Intacct, learn how to navigate, enter data quickly, personalize your space, and get introduced to the key concepts such as dimensions. The applications, I think, is where you're going to go most often to get help with the applications you use every day. And you can see that all of the applications are going to be listed there. Reporting, for everything from graphs to dashboards to every different type of report. You'll find it here categorized by subject area so you can quickly find what you need to find. Administration. So this has long been something that administrators of Intacct have asked for. It's just a centralized place where you can go to learn all about the things that admins do. Adding users, creating roles and permissions, how to change and update passwords, all your security settings. If you're not an admin, you can still go here, learn how to change your password, and do some of those light admin tasks that are available to all users. Under the More button, that's kind of, again, a little catch-all button, and underneath there you've got information on how to import and export data on any consoles for those of you that are operating in a distributed environment, information on customization and platform services, Collaborate, integrations with Salesforce, integrations with Avalara and Sales Tax, 1099s, and everything else. So it's really nice to be able to browse by topic here. I also included a link down the bottom of some search tips that Intacct has recommended for how best to search through the help. So definitely check that out if you're not finding what you need. I know sometimes half the time in being able to find what you're looking for is putting the right combination of words in the right order with the right amount of letters to be able to pull up what you need. So it'll help with your Intacct search foo. To be able to go there and do that. Okay, other enhancements. So this is kind of, I'm not going to go through each one of these individual. They're all relatively small updates, but still important to be able to understand if you're using any of these services. There's a number of things here. Two big callouts. The top level in multi-entity companies, if you had previously been using that as an operating entity, you will be able to continue doing so. However, new configurations, you will not be able to elect that as an option. Everything has to be in an entity to allow for specific entity reporting going forward. And the other big one is smart events and rules have now been extended to roles and user groups. So you can set smart events and rules if people change, modify, or delete any of those items. So that's a great internal control to have as well. Okay, and now I am going to switch over into my demo company so we can take a look at the new beta. Okay. Okay. Manesh, are you seeing my sample database? Excellent. Great. So let me move this over to the other side here. Get this off the screen because it's hiding the thing we need. So you've probably heard by now about the new Intacct Intacct interface called Action. So this is really exciting, and I think it's going to take some getting used to. I know change is hard for everybody, but this is a really, really slick interface, and I think after you get used to using it, you can do it. So the first thing I want to say is this can be done on a user-by-user basis. You can switch back and forth between the two interfaces. What I'm showing now is the legacy interface, and up here in the top right corner, Enable Beta UI is where you will come to switch into the new user interface. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Okay. So this is an example of what the new user interface is going to look like. It's a little bit more modular. It's a little bit more drag and drop, and it really looks and feels like a more updated version here. So the first thing I want to point out to you here is at the top right, you can toggle between the new UI and the old UI just by clicking this off button. If I select that here, it will put us back into the original UI. Right next to it is the Send Us Feedback button. I encourage you to use this liberally. Right now, you cannot open any support cases related to the new UI. They're not accepting those at this time, but you can send feedback. And you can send feedback in the form of ideas, a testimonial if you really love it, or you can just give them like a general note about how you're feeling about it, things you like, things you don't like, things you would like to see. They're having a really long beta period so that they can collect all of this data. They really want you to go in and check it out. So I encourage you, if you've been using Intacct for a long time and you're worried about it, go ahead and check it out, maybe do a couple of transactions in this beta. Everything that you do in the beta is going to be posted to your live database. What UI stands for is user interface, in case you're not familiar with that term. So all it's changing is how Intacct is presented to you on the website. It's not changing any of the underlying data or functionality at this point. So definitely send them some feedback there. The other thing that I want to point out is now the Help Center is in the top right-hand corner of all screens in the form of a question mark. So this is where you would come to see the Help Center. So that's pretty exciting as well. Lastly, well, not lastly, but lastly on this top part here, I also wanted to point out the bookmarks. So previously you had global search and bookmarks were under my preferences. So now you can do the bookmarks right from here. So that's a pretty nice option as well. So one of the nice things is before you had to set the order of your menu bars under my preferences, and that's no longer the case. Now you can just drag and drop the various things. So you can switch them around. You still can't move dashboards. Oh, maybe you can. I lied. So now you can move the dashboards and reports. So if you have users that aren't using those, before those two items were actually locked in place. It was dashboards and reports and you couldn't move them. So now that it's individual, you can actually change this around every time you're in here. And that's pretty exciting change to be able to customize your experience there. Moving into kind of one of the modules here, one of the nice things about this is now we have this navigation side panel. So on this right-hand side here, I have selected a number of favorites, and those are all that I'm seeing. So I'm not seeing the whole laundry list of all of the things that are available in the system that I have access to. I'm able to select just the things that I'm a favorite. So when you're on the all screen, all you have to do is come here and just select the star next to it, and it will add it to your favorites menu. So when you navigate to each different module, it will default to your favorites. And by default, Intacct has selected a number of things on each menu that it thinks most users are going to want to have on their favorites menu, but you can go in and customize that for yourself there. You also have the ability to hide it as you're working to get a more full screen experience. So it can go away and come back. So most screens within the system have been updated in terms of look and feel. For example, this is the new bill entry screen. There are some screens that have not been updated because they are still working through this. It's still in beta. So in that case, what you're going to see is a new look coming soon. It'll be a little post right at the top. So that's really nice. The other thing that's really nice here is you can see as I scroll down through this that my action buttons at the top right-hand side are now static, and you don't have them available at the bottom. They're no longer needed at the bottom because they will always stay at the top. So you'll always be able to come up here and do your posting or to add new items, delete new items, whatever the case may be, depending on what screen you're in. So it's nice to have those action buttons be frozen right at the top there. I think the last thing I wanted to show you, there's a lot available in this new UI, but I want to make sure we leave time for questions at the end. So the last thing I'm going to talk about today is the new report center. So the nice thing is here, if I expand this out, we had kind of touched on this when I was covering for Manesh on the reports there, is that now you have the ability to have everything that you need to create a report available on the task menu in the report center. So if you need to create new account groups, new accounts, new budgets, report groups, any of your dimensions, you can do that. So that is a really nice feature to now not have to duplicate your tab and go somewhere else. You can do it right from here in a pop-out while you're building your report to be able to have everything. For anybody who's done a lot of report building, that's a really nice feature because when you're duplicating tabs and making changes on other tabs, every time you do that, you have to refresh. So that means you have to save, and then you have to refresh your screen to be able to get that new data. Having everything in one place means you're still logged into the same tab, so any updates that you mean you don't have to actually refresh to be able to do that. So I think that's a really exciting update. Okay, so passing the control back to headquarters. Okay, so in conclusion, we've covered all of our updates to purchasing, to contracts, administration, projects, inventory, reporting, a whole boatload of other enhancements, as well as the new user interface, the Action UI.
So we did actually receive a whole bunch of questions, so if we don't get through all of them today, we'll definitely send you guys some. And there are a few that were similar, so I'll try and kind of consolidate a little bit. Pardon me, excuse me. Since we just covered the new beta UI, I'll start with some of the questions that came through for that one. So first question on that, does Intacct have a date where this will move out of beta and it will become the default UI?
Yes, but they're not sharing the exact date, of course. What they have told us is it will be sometime early next year is when everybody will be forced to move to it. And honestly, you're going to want to move to it before then. And the reason I say that is because in the fall, in either release 3 or 4, they're going to come out with 2 things that are going to make you want to switch to the new user interface. The first one is going to be the new custom report writer. That's only going to be available in the new UI. And the second one is the accounts payable workbench. Which some of you, if you've been to any of the customer meetups or you've been on any of their webinars, it's a one-stop shop for accounts payable, and those 2 features are only going to be available in the new UI. So you're probably going to want to switch before they force you to make sure you can take advantage of those great new features.
Yeah, and a quick call out, exactly as Brenda mentioned, I think I've already mentioned this to some of my clients, that custom report wizard is taking a huge user interface revamp. And you're going to want to use that new custom report wizard compared to a lot of the pain points that a lot of clients have with the current custom report wizard. It can design some pretty awesome reports, but it does take quite a bit to kind of delve through all the different layers within the different objects. So great point, Brenda. Just want to reiterate.
Awesome.
And also on the new UI, we did get a couple questions about color coding. So is it possible to color code the background for different entities still?
Yes, actually, and apologies for not demoing that. So now you can do that right from your top level drop down. So when you're in that drop down and you see your list of entities, just to the left of it, now you're going to have a little colored circle, and you can click on that colored circle and change it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It looks like they have 10 or 11. My counting is not so good today, options to be able to switch to the colors. So if you do have more entities than that in your instance, then you may need to repeat some colors.
Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch over back to sort of earlier in the webinar, you guys talked about different enhancements to the purchasing approval. So we got a number of questions on that, so I'll switch over and then we'll cover in that section for a bit. For approvers, do they need a full license, or is it okay if they have a read-only license?
So similar, that's kind of the same. So if they have an employee license, they will be able to do department level approvals on purchase requisitions. Similar to, that hasn't changed. That's the only, because that's the only non-posting entry within purchasing. So employee users will be able to take advantage of that. You do have to be a business user to be able to do approvals on purchase orders and to convert them into vendor invoices.
And actually, on the same purchasing approval vein, is there any plan to allow delegation of approvals for AP and GL transactions as well?
Great question. I have heard that is possible down the road, but as far as I am aware, it is not on the near-term roadmap.
Thanks, Brenda.
No
so we'll keep an eye out for that one for you guys who are curious about that one. We'll put it on a future release if that happens.
Absolutely.
And then we did have a question around, do you guys have any examples in this? If you have a sample to show, I mean, we can do this, offline a bit, but show the disposal of an asset. I think that question came around when you were talking about, Manesh was one of your sections.
Okay, yeah, well, the disposal of an asset is in the fixed asset module, so not really related to this release, but for whomever wrote up that question, yeah, we can totally either set up a quick call to show you how the disposal works in like a sample environment, or send you screenshots and kind of walk you through that process. But the disposal is done inside of the entity of if you've got the fixed assets module, Intacct fixed assets module, and similar to posting depreciation, the disposal can have like a type associated, so you can say, hey, was it fully depreciated? Did you sell the asset? Was it stolen, unfortunately? And put a residual value on the amount of the disposal, and then it will actually back out the asset, the accumulated depreciation, and then record the gain and loss to the to that fixed asset gain or loss account. So we can totally demo that or show you screenshots if you need it.
Yeah, and it's similar for any third-party add-ins as well. And of course, if you're not using a fixed asset module, you would just do a journal to dispose of it.
Correct. This will all hit the fixed asset journal just like any other journal entry.
Yes.
Good call out.
So I know that we have a few more questions on here, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time since we're right at the end of the hour there. So if we didn't get to your question or if you have any follow-up questions, you are welcome to contact Manesh or Brenda directly. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, we did record today's webinar, so I'll send out a link for you all to access the on-demand recording, as well as a link to download the slides themselves so that you guys can go through them at your own pace if you'd like and share them as well. As you exit today's webinar, there is a quick survey, so please take a moment to let us know your thoughts on the webinar today and let us know anything that you'd like to see in future webinars. We're always open to new suggestions, of course. Thank you to Brenda and Manesh for sharing all of your great content today, and of course, thank you to all of our audience members for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.